Okay, uh, let's start. So basically, what we are gonna talking about is debugging. First. You guys can see and hear what I'm typing, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. So debugging, basically, we'll go step by step. Whenever you start to do the debugging, right? The first phase of debugging is usually a simple round of debugging. And what you essentially do here is, look for the casual mistakes you make, the
Mm.
silly kinds of mistakes. Before you start any complex debugging, it is better that you do first check, all your code to find some silly mistake where you might be typing in some wrong letter or something like that. Mostly lint, yes, lint takes care of all the issues, but always there is a case, that is slightly silly, but, the lint cannot catch it because it's nothing related to the TypeScript. It can be related to the database schema or, there are thousands of different examples on these silly kinds of mistakes, and no one can teach anyone on what all those casual mistakes are. You can only learn them by experience. So just do a first thorough check on your code. Just read your entire code once to see if everything is right. If everything is right, then you go to the next step. Okay, once, okay, right. So that is the first round, simple debugging, basically. And then the second round of debugging starts like, it's a medium level. It's not really that complicated either. So basically here, what you're not even looking for logical errors. What you're looking for is just to check internet expertise. So usually you have an error, right? When you're debugging something, you have an error. So you search for it on Google, and most of the times you find the answers in Slack Overflow, or some GitHub discussions, or something like that. So if you can find the solutions there, then all is well, right? So these first two are like literally the simplest levels of debugging, so that just you do not waste your time. Now comes the complex level of debugging. Okay, mostly the first two cases are fit if you are not working on anything complicated. Okay, the complex level of debugging only kicks in when you are something working in depth. Like if you are working on a sign up form that is not complicated, but let's just say you are working on a dashboard, or maybe you are working on the Canva app. Like if you are building the Canva app and you need to build the HTML Canva file and all of it, then that is complicated because of the amount of
Yeah.
customizations that are there. It's complicated. So when that complexity is involved, then you start doing the complex level of debugging. Okay, and there are two kinds of complexity here: logical complexity and the unknown complexity. Okay, so what I mean by unknown complexity is that, simply that it's a edge tech, right? Something new that is being formed, and there is not enough documentation, or maybe the documentation exists, but it's not good enough, or maybe
Mm.
there is no documentation at all, or maybe it's a self innovation. If the project is a self innovation and there exists nothing to rely on, then the complexity cannot be measured. Anyway, the logical complexity is the example just I said, like the Canva error, or maybe you're using a lot of hooks, right? In React hooks, like you're using a lot of React hooks, and somewhere it is being recursive, like
Yeah.
some callback that needs to be called only once for every, I don't know, 10 seconds. It is being called, quite spontaneously very many times. So this kind of stuff you cannot really find where the error is, because there is no error in the console panel, right? You only see, the logical complexity, right? I'll tell you some few examples on how I take care of them. So first, we'll talk about logical complexity. So basically, do you know how tires are, replaced? Tires, punctured tires.
Yeah.
Okay, so basically the way the puncture ties are fixed is you take the tube out, and then they don't know where the hole is. So what they do, they try to pump in air, putting the tube inside a bucket of water, and they pump in the air,
Yeah.
step by step, so that they can find out where the hole is. Like whenever the bubbles pop up from the water, then that's where the hole is. So that's how they fix the puncture tie. So it's something like that. What you do, it's a step by step iterative debugging. So you don't know where the error is. So you put in console.log statements at different steps to understand first what the process is happening and where the error is going on. So here I'll just take a quick example of something, here, this one, the get price function.
Mm.
Essentially, this function, okay, I'll just share you the original thing. So Uniswap math primer. Okay. What I'm gonna say is does not fall under debugging, but I'm just gonna say it anyway. So first thing is, let's just say you are implementing this edge tech, solution where you are doing basically what this guy says is just put this function as it is and it will work. But the thing is, when you actually copy paste this function, it will not work at all. Now, oftentimes am I there? Am I audible?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So basically what happens is if you put this function as is, the first error you will run into is that you will get infinities and zeros errors. And before even that, I'm guessing you will get the JavaScript error. Basically,
Yeah, JSL.
yeah, 2 power 96 is not something that JavaScript can calculate itself. Right now, you need to figure out an alternative on how to do big number calculations. For that, there are libraries called big number, which I mean, if you do some Googling, you will figure out, how the bigger number calculations are there, being done in JavaScript. But that is not the question you should search for, because, you're solving it over here and you're solving it for blockchain, and, there is some context here. The question you should search for is, how to do calculations in, cryptocurrency related or something like that. If you give some context to the internet, then the internet will help you find better, because you're not the only one working on the cryptocurrency applications, right? Many people are working on it, and many people might have faced similar issues. You could have also searched for how to do JavaScript big number calculation, but that requires understanding where the problem is. I'm
Yeah.
sure you will be able to figure out the solution, but it requires that, how should I say, you might be thrown into a different kind of solution that is not useful for the cryptocurrency, because there is big int. There is several other libraries that will let JavaScript help do complex number calculations. But you do not want to go into the wrong string, so give the right context to the internet when you're doing the search. Okay. Now you have the right context, and now you know that the big number is how you should solve this. So now, this is the first thing, right? So basically, you'll transform this equation into big number.
Yeah.
Basically, it's nothing but I'm guessing SQ price X96 is already a big number. So
Yeah.
I'll try to share uh, function. Okay. If you see, this is the function that I came up with, but this is not the initial function that I have written. If you see, and first the thing is you need to understand the logic. Like once you are trying to refactor the entire code, first you need to understand what this mathematical formula is. Otherwise, you'll not be able to build it. So he gives a clear description on what the mathematical formula is, like square root x by power to 96 and whole square and all of that. So first thing you do is you follow the exact pattern that the user suggests, that whatever this document suggests. So I did this. I did big number dot from of sqrt price x96 dot div of 2 power 96 whole square. So I did this entire thing. I formulated the entire thing correctly. But what happened was, when I was doing this, I was getting divided by zero error.
Yeah, that
Basically,
infinite error.
yeah, infinite and zero error. Basically, in JavaScript, at least you can, divide by zero and it will give you infinity. But what happens in big numbers is if the zero has a decimal too big, like if it is 0.00000, and then the actual value starts 201324 something. Like if that is, if the zeros are too long, then the big number will disvalidate itself. So what you can do is you can do nothing. This formula actually works for other people, but not, for our case scenario. Essentially, it is because the top number that we are trying to divide by 2 power 96 is much lower than, it should be. That is why when you divide it with by 2 power 96, you're getting, not 1 point something or like that, but you're getting 0.0000 something.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's the problem of our pool. Usually it is not the case for all the other pools, but you can't do anything about it. You need to, improvise. So in this case, what you can do is reverse it. Since I can't do this by this, then I'll try to do the reverse. So 2 power 96 by this. And at the end, when I'm trying to convert the big number to actual number, then I will, throw in the decimals as a factor. So I'll tell you what I mean by it. First, so I did the 2 power 96 but divided by square root, and then I whole squared it. So basically I got the SQRT. So whatever formula this guy is calling price is, I got this same formula, but I got it in an inverse number. Are you
Mm.
getting me?
Yeah.
So first I got the price in an inverse, and then by one of token one is, so what I'm doing here is format units. I'm getting the square root price into Bigint, and then I'm converting it. If you
Mm.
observe the original formula for this, let me show you. So for the original formula, buy one of token zero is the original formula where he does what? He does divided by 10 power decimal, 1 by 10 power decimal 0. That's nothing but 10 power decimal 1 minus 0, right? And then he fixes it to decimal 1. The basically what this does is 10 power decimal 1 minus 0, and then he is formatting the units to decimal 1.
Yeah.
So what I did was basically, since I have the inverse of this, so basically I have the inverse of this number, then I did the reverse, decimal 0 minus decimal 1. Basically, you don't even need to understand all the mathematical calculation that is happening here. What you can do is basically simply log in the console.log SQRT price, right? And then since it is a factor of something like 10 power something, so essentially this square root price value here would be like 0.000000234, right? And the actual value, look for the actual value in the pool. Like if you look for this pool's actual value in the Uniswap, then you will find that the actual value that it should return is 234 point, something.
Yes.
Okay, so now you understand what you need to get out of this number. So you do not know what the exact calculation should be, but at least you need to know, you can know the final result should be. So then
Mm.
you do the, rest of the logic, play with it, put decimal zero once, put decimal zero plus decimal one once, put decimal zero, decimal minus one one. I would not suggest this, but this is the fast level of debugging. When you are in a hurry to do something, this works. But at the end of the day, even though this works, this is not the correct solution. Are you getting me? Because we're not exactly following, the entire logic pool here. So basically, this might work for our pool, but it will not work for all the pools in the Uniswap because we did some things that we should not do. Maybe what happens if the SQRT price x96 is actually lower than 2 power
Yeah.
96? Then again, the division by zero error will pop in, right? So it's not a solution for everything. It's a solution for only, this case scenario. So I'll try to show you the actual solution for this, but that is more complicated. So I'll not talk about that now, but you get a basic understanding on how to, the puncture method that I just said. So
Yes. Yes.
break it in steps and try to figure out what the next step should be looking like, and then do the rest of the middle steps, right? The second, I'd understand the second way to do logical complexities is not just the console.logs. At the end of the day, if you want to do logical complexity debugging, then you need to understand what exactly is happening. Okay. I don't mean but in the case scenario that in the sequence of events. So puncture tires are the step-by-step iterative debugging. You're trying to figure out the sequence of events. Like what
Yeah.
is the first event that is called, what is the second event is called, what that is the third event called. So that's how you do, iterative debugging, or figure out at which step it breaks and solve it at that step. But here, what exactly is happening? You don't even care like which step is calling which step and which is calling which step. First, you need to understand like what is happening internally at all in the first place. Okay.
Mm.
So this case scenario, basically it means that you need to dive into, what the root logic of it. Sometimes you just use, how should I say? Mm, Sometimes you just use parsent, but do you truly understand what parsent is? Like, do you know what will happen if you pass an NaN to pass in? Will it return, what are you using is NaN, or maybe you're using, something else? Some literally simple functions, you just use it because you are habituated to it, like use callback, use memo, use effect, use state, all of these things. Because you already understand the application of it, you think you understand what is the logic behind it. But in actual truth, you do not know what the logic behind it is happening, in the essence. So now the key comes here, like when you're, fix. I would not suggest you need to go to this step, but if it is necessary, then you need to go into this step, right? So what you
Yeah.
can do is try to understand what the logic is and where it is, failing me. So one example I can go into is this use pool info, right? So here, right? So this, takes in the interval and it is passing the interval as, use effect parameter. And then, it is calling a set interval function. At every interval, this get pool info is called.
Yeah.
And then at return, it is clearing the interval. So on an overall perspective, what this function does is on the component mount, it is calling, it is setting a new interval function. And when the component unmounts, it is clearing the interval function.
Yeah.
So this is, what it does. So initially it's pool info set pool info, and it iteratively calls, this get pool info. Like it's sent in at every interval, it calls this, get pool info. Okay. Now you need to understand, like, if let's just say this function you used it somewhere in the component, but what happened was, here is how it was running in actual execution. When you are trying to run this function, this is how it's running. So the first time it calls after 10 seconds. Okay.
Yeah.
The second time it doesn't call after 10 seconds, it calls after 5 seconds. And the third time it calls after 2.5 seconds. And then the fourth time, slowly, if you just leave your browser as it is, and if you come back, I don't know, like 10 minutes later or something like that, there would be so many calls happening. Like if you put in console.log here, there would be so many calls, that is happening over here, that you wouldn't even know why this callback is calling so many times, even though you have clearly written it, right? On you have to clear the interval on component unmount, right?
Yeah.
So why is it calling again and again and again, even though I have written, when it should be, logging out or whatever that is. So now there are, if you truly understand the logic here, then you need to basically just debug it from the logic side. Like I don't even know how to explain it correctly, but you understand two major points here, right? One is the function runs when the, or should I say the interval gets attached when the component mounts, and
Yeah.
the interval gets disattached when the component unmounts, right? So this gives, a pretty clear, like what does this mean? When the component unmounts, does it, immediately clear the interval? No, it doesn't clear the interval, because if the await fetch pool info is still running, then the callback will still continue as it is. It only clears the interval. That means that the next callback will not be called. But the current callback that is already in the running, it would still be getting executed, right? That's
Yeah.
the first point you need to, if you retrace your steps back from the how the logic is being executed, that's the first step you'll understand. The second, it is this entire hook is dependent on the component that you are using. If the component gets refreshed 100 times, then it means that this hook is being reinitiated 100 times. So the error might not even be in this hook. The error might be in the component that is calling this hook. Are
Yeah.
you getting me?
Correct.
So that component might be refreshing too fast. Maybe it's a controlled input variable. Like maybe it is having an input and it is binded with some state function. So whenever the state is getting updated, the input gets updated. Along with it, the entire component is getting refreshed. Maybe somehow it is getting refreshed. You can do some checks on it by putting, there is a way to check how many times it is being refreshed. But so that's how you can debug into it. Like you understand the logic and try to figure out basically what I mean by logic is try to think in the perspective of a computer. Try to think in the perspective of a machine on how this code is going to get executed instead of thinking in the perspective of the coder and how you wish it to be executed. So there is a clear difference. You write code hoping that it works like one, but in actuality it works like one because the machine executes it in a way, and you need to understand that way to properly figure out the logic. It's not the logic you write, but the logic that gets executed that you need to understand. Are you getting me? Am I making sense?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. So what exactly is happening once you figured this down, you have some avenue points in which you can debug into. Right now, I just explained two avenue points. One is the error might not even be here. It's in the component. The second is the error is that when you're clearing the interval, it only clears the next callback. So the second point might not be causing too much issue. It only just might be fetching, double function. But the first thing, which is actually is a big issue because it is refreshing every time the component re-renders. Now, how do you go about solving this issue, right? So for a critical problem like this, then first thing is you could search for some examples, but you would not be able to find it anywhere in the internet because you cannot frame your question correctly because it's quite complicated. Like how would you frame it? Like I have a component that refreshes too many times and it has internally calling an interval function which is also being called too many times. You can write it in Stack Overflow and then wait for 10 days or 20 days for someone to figure out it for you, but that's too much time waste, right? So you need to engineer the solution by yourself, like to figure out what is the best way so that the component, even if the component refreshes, the pool info will only be called once, right? The the simplest way that I can think of is to put the use pool info at somewhere at the top level. So basically, I'm not guessing the entire page will get refreshed, right? So the page
Yeah.
will only be rendered once. It will not get refreshed, the entire time, unless you're using some weird component, that is refreshing the entire layouts, something. But it will not get refreshed most of the time. So you can put it at the page level and pass it as a provider, a React context provider, and set it in the React context, or use Redux maybe and set it in the Redux. That is one way to solve it. But let's just say you can't put it in a provider because this is something specific to a component. It is not specific to the entire app, and it is
Yeah.
specific to a component. That case can arise, right? So in that case scenario, what you need to do is you need to make sure that this fetch should not run twice or thrice or whatever many times it is being getting called. So what you can do is you can check for the interval ID. Instead of putting the interval ID over here, you can do ref, right? Const
Yeah.
interval.
Ref.
Yeah. So interval ID equals to use ref. So anyway, use ref, and then you can put interval ID dot current equals to set interval. And let's just say this somehow this hook got re-triggered, right? So you can check if the interval dot ID current exists, and then you can clear the interval.
Yeah.
So that will force reset. And the second thing is you can put a flag inside this hook, inside this fetch callback, right? So what happens is the problem is not the fetch callback. You can't cancel it. Of course, there are ways to cancel it. I'll not go into that deep level. But let's just say the fetch callback is still running. But the second fetch callback has already been started, even when the first fetch callback is still running. So what you want to do is you want to disable the first fetch callback's execution. That means you should not let it update the pool info. Otherwise, this pool info might conflict with the second pattern that is happening. So for this, you can use flags, right? You can, create a flag that says const, flag ID or something like that. And then when this function gets starting to execute it, then you put that like just like interval ID only. So you can just put like const some flag for pool info, and then again you put in use ref. So basically what happens is just before this await thing starts, you can, put flag for pool info dot current equals to some random ID, right? And then here what you would see is if flag for pool info dot current equals to this random ID. I mean, you store this random ID somewhere here, like let underscore ID equals to random ID, and then you put the under ID at the current, and let's just say you're fetching it. If the flag pool for dot current is still this underscore ID, then that means no new callback has been triggered. That will reset the flag pool dot current to some other different ID. Are you getting me? So that
Yeah.
way, what happens is the old callback will, the new callback will only get executed. The old callback will still get executed, but it will not be updating the state. Are you
Correct.
following?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. So yeah, these are few ways that I can immediately think of on, how to solve this. But for a case to case basis, it is entirely different on what you can figure out on what exactly is happening. The solutions will also be different. The idea here is just to be creative on how to make sure that the machine is understanding what you intend for it to understand. Here I'm making sure that machine understand that it cannot just randomly call, functions whenever it wants to. It needs to check first if there is a function already executing, and if it is already executing, then do something or something like that. And the second thing is do not always call the interval ID, or or you can put it. So basically I'm clearly explaining the machine on what it needs to do once I figured out and understanding what exactly is the machine doing. So think in the machine perspective, and then you are more, closer to the logical complexity of it. The
Yeah.
si-
Got it.
the examples I have given are quite basic actually. It's because I can't really explain much complex examples in a simple talk. But if you take around and play with Canva, like if you wish to build some Canva app, then you will, dig into the real complexity, right? Just imagine
Yeah.
how many complex events needs to happen behind the Canva board, or maybe building the Figma app. Like it's very complex. So in that case scenario, here comes the most important part. When you know that your system is going to get really complex, then what you should have done is you have to write in a structured way right from the start. If you have not written your code in a structured way right from the start, in a robust or structured way, then what happens is you will have too much technical debt.
Yeah.
So just because your client asks a new feature and you keep on implementing or hot fixing the stuff instead of rightly implementing it, then at that particular point you will not see any you know discrepancies. But as it slowly gets complicated and complicated and complicated, you will not be able to handle it, and the client would think that you are not good enough for it or something like that. So basically never let that happen. Even if the client demands that he wants to get such a simple feature done, you need to be able to explain to the client on why it is important that we build a proper structural system. It's basically like building a building. If you don't clear out the ground basement and put the basement right, then everything else you build is just a stack of cards. It can simply be blown away. So that's important. Like the basement is really important, especially for when you know that the complexity that the machine needs to process is very complex. If it is not that complex, then it is simple enough. Then you can, do hot fixes or whatever it is. Okay. So next I'll talk about unknown complexity or edge tech complexity. Basically, this means that, the document is not clear. Like we have already talked about one unknown complexity, this that is this document, right? This documentation is not clear because it does not take JavaScript into consideration. It purely takes, server level JavaScript or maybe Java. So basically, for unknown complexity cases, it's usually the case, you are running into bad documentations, or maybe documentations exist, but there is a patch in the SDK or something like that. Okay. So now I'll talk about one such case scenario so that I can explain on how you can do. So here the code of it comes from, again, it's exactly what exactly is happening only. It's just that you need to go a bit deeper. So basically it means that you need to understand what is happening even internal to the SDK, right? If this first level and the second level debugging didn't fix it, then already you're here. Then it means that, there is nothing that can solve over here. So you will be entering the next step, right? So again, the thing is, both in logical complexity and unknown complexity, you should be really careful. You should not enter the complex level of debugging if it can be solved with one or two. So if it can be solved with one or two, you should just solve it with one or two, because once you enter complex level of debugging, it's like a nightmare. It takes a lot of time, to solve such issues. So you need to be ready for it. Okay. So I'll just explain on why I'm saying all this, right? So this is the trading thing, right? So I'll show you the example of it. Uniswap execute trade. Okay. This is like the executing trade. So So the documentation is quite clear, or at least that's what we would believe when you see this, neat documentation where everything is explained on what is happening and stuff like that. So if you copy all of it as it is, all of it was working fine until the fact when you're actually executing the trade, it's not working.
Yeah,
Okay,
it was failing.
it was
Yes.
failing. The user operation gets reverted, and there is no way for you to track what is happening and all. So basically, the first thing I did was, since I was on a smart wallet, I could not understand what the error is. So I tried to, use the MetaMask and then try to figure out what the error is or what is happening. Okay,
Mm.
so that didn't solve anything. Even the MetaMask, it was giving me the error in some hexadecimal, and I cannot really, convert the hexadecimal into something readable and try to understand, what the error is, because the error is not exactly the error. If it was a clearly explainable error, then the error would be printed out, usually in the MetaMask or something like that. Like instead of user operation reverted, what you would get is insufficient balance or
Mm.
insufficient funds or maybe approval required or something like that. You would clearly see the error. But if it is, something else, like even the contract doesn't know what the error is, then what should you do? Like you don't even know where the error is, causing or happening. So then you need to understand again what exactly is happening at a deeper level,
Mm.
right? So if you try to understand this first thing, right, this works fine for us. Like I did the first level step of debugging, that is puncture type method, where I'm doing the console.log it step by step by step. So this was working fine. And the call data that we are getting from is actually fetching, the correct prices. And the trade that we are creating is also good enough, like the amount, the input amount and the returned output amount, both of them are cool, the way they should be.
Yeah.
So they are all fine. But immediately after, when I do this, it's failing. So the
Yeah.
first thing I thought was maybe something is wrong in the swap options. Maybe I'm, passing in the wrong slippage tolerance. So I tried 100, 1000, different numbers. Nothing really worked. And then I tried, maybe I'm using the same wallet address. That's why I'm getting the error. I tried different wallet address. Again, it did not work. Essentially, I'm blind running stuff, at this point, to figure out what is happening, but none of it really worked. Okay. So then I'm really stuck, like, because this transaction, I try to understand if there is something wrong with the way I'm executing the valid.send transaction, and I try to do a different kind of transaction instead of this transaction that I see. But that transaction, is working fine. So the error is not, in the valid.send transaction. It's
Yeah.
somewhere else. Now, I'm totally confused because the only thing that this does that is not there above anywhere else. So I try to differentiate what is happening that exists there but does not exist here. So the differentiation, yeah, this can be a good thing just to remember as, differentiate. So what is working in one place and what is not working in one place. So if you can differentiate, you will most probably close in on the error. It would still not be clear, but you would be at least be able to close in. So the differentiation here and, over here is one thing I could immediately understand was this constant swap router address.
Mm.
Okay, when I take a look at the swap router address, it did not immediately strike me. Okay, I'll be frank with that. It took some time, maybe 1 or 2 hours, but then I was able to, understand why the swap router address is important. Because the error that we are getting from the contract has no clear description. If it was an error inside the contract, we will get a clear description on saying that insufficient balance or maybe cash funds insufficient or something like that. But the error that we are getting is that basically, the user doesn't know or the transaction cannot go through. It is
Yeah.
failing. So then that means there is something wrong with the swap router address. Maybe we are passing in the wrong swap router address. Okay. So now I started doing, some research on base deployments on what the current swap address would be. So I see that there is only one swap router too. There is not much, any other things that I can pass.
Mm.
So there is nothing I can do here. So what I did was I tried to do the direct transaction on the Uniswap. So like I have gone into the Uniswap pool and then I did the transaction there, and then it creates the transaction link, right? So I go into the basecamp.org of that transaction. And what I found was Uniswap is not even considering using the swap router tool. It is using the universal router, like this address it was using instead of this address. Okay. So then I thought I figured out the error, and then I just copy pasted this universal router address, and then I pasted it over here, and then boom, what do you know? It didn't work. So the universal, that is not the solution. So then I started going a bit deeper, like trying to understand what is universal router and, what exactly it is. So you go into the contracts of the universal router. So yeah, you have this universal router dot solid. So they are calling this thing, right? And I have also checked what exactly we are calling when we are doing this, transaction call. So when you're doing that actual transaction, you're passing in this method parameters dot call data, right? Which
Yes.
actually explains which function you're calling on the contract and such details. So,
Yes.
those details are, converted from here, swap call parameters. So
Yep.
I do not know what those details are. So I'll need to go into like the internal V3 SDK to figure out what those are. Like if I go into the swap router, currently I'm not able to open it, but if you go into the swap router, all you can see is basically TypeScript files. You will not be able to see this function at all. So you need to open this V3 SDK in GitHub. Okay. So this is the SDK that, internally it is being used, right? So now you need to go to the swap router. So this is the swap router, right? So basically it is passing in this slippage tolerance, recipient deadline, input token, square price limit, and fee and all of this, right? So I did take a double check on just to check, the contract that is calling, right? And that's when I figured out that this swap column parameters, it is not calling this swap router 02. It's calling a swap router 01, which does not exist in the base chain at all. Like you go to the Ethereum deployments, you see this swap router, right? So this
Yeah.
is this is what it was calling. So this contract is what it was calling, and the exact function it is calling is exact input single, like it is calling this exact function, right? And it is the call data that we are passing is this struct, basically this TypeScript type file. So you go to exact inputs single. So basically you cannot see it here. So you need to go to interfaces. Interfaces are basically TypeScript files. That is all. So where is it? ISwap router. So you have this exact input single parameters, and these are the parameters that I just showed in the V3 SDK that are also being converted. You see, here when the call data is being called, it is also doing token in, token out, fee, receipt, deadline, amount in, amount out, security price X limited, and stuff like that. So it's the exact same thing, over here. Now, what I need to understand is if swap router is like that, then what is the swap router 02 looking like, right? So I go into swap router 02. So now I have nothing over here. Like it only tells me it's an ISwap router 02. So I need to go to the ISwap 02, and then it
Yeah, I
again.
honestly I checked this same exact thing, but I couldn't understand.
Yeah. So yeah, the thing about debugging is you can't give up. You need to go deeper and deeper
Yeah.
until you can figure it out. So now inside ISwap router 02, I have gone into IV2 swap router. Again, nothing over here. Maybe it's in the V2 swap router. V3 swap router. Yeah, here you have it. So this is the function that we need to call. Now, if you compare this and the previous thing that I just showed, uh, this is the universal loader, sorry. So anyway, if you compare this and the previous thing, you would notice that the only missing thing is deadline. So there is no deadline over here, but there was deadline back there in the
Yes.
original swap router. Yeah, here you have the deadline over here and you don't have the deadline over here. So this means that the encoded parameters that we are getting from the swap collimeters, that call data has an extra parameter that does not exist in the contract that we are calling. So there is
Yeah.
a struct mismatch, when we are calling that thing. Now what we need to do is we need to figure out a way to pass in the same parameters without the deadline, right?
Mm.
Now, what I did was I could have done the encode call data, but we do not understand really what exactly is happening inside the functional call. So what I did was basically I copy pasted this entire swap router. Okay. And then I created a swap router 02 internally inside,
Okay.
over here. So internally I created swap router 02, right? But this still doesn't solve it. Like I disabled the deadline, right? And then I removed the deadline in the passing parameters, right?
Mm.
Now came the second question, that is that here the interface, it was using the iswaprouter.avi. This is
Mm.
the original swap router AVI, that is swap router 0. Now I
Yeah.
had to switch this iswap router to swap router 02. So I had to figure out where exactly can I figure out the swap router 02, and then I replace it with the swap router 02. It was not quite easy to figure out where this exists
Yeah.
because it's the Uniswap is has so many contracts inside it. It was not easy. But anyway, once I figured that out, I put the ISwap router over here in the interface, and then now it will start working because just because I replace the deadline, it doesn't work, right? So you need to understand a little bit of what is happening internally. Otherwise, you will be coming at the wrong solutions. So I don't need to understand all of this, but at least I need to understand where the call data is being returned, right? So
Yeah.
the call data is this, right? Call datas. So what exactly is happening inside the call datas, right? So this is where I see this encode function data of exact input, right? This is the exact input single, and this is the function that we are calling, right?
Mhm.
But this encoding is happening via an interface that has nothing to do with what we are trying to figure out.
Yeah.
So that's when I figured out that I need to replace this. Otherwise, things will not work as I'm hoping it to be. So then I replace this, and then you have a functional swap router 02. And then when I'm doing the actual trading, I was using the swap router 02. Uh, so yeah, as you see, I removed the deadline, and then yeah, this is an approved transaction. So here you see the swap router 02 dot swap column parameters, and then I'm passing the trade, and then the options is as is. And now I don't know what exactly what all the other logic that is happening inside the swap router 02, and I would not even like to understand because that's not what I'm engineering at the moment. I just need to get the parameters correct. So I got the correct parameters, and then I passed it, and then it was working fine. So that's how you debug, right? So basically you need to go in deeper and deeper until you can find the solution. There is no easy way to it when you're working on HTech projects, especially because this fix I did, I will most probably create a patch and create a fork on their open source repository so that they can merge the pull request for their patch. But I also checked like if there was any other people who noticed this issue, or is it me? So I typed for swap router 02. Uh, uh, swap. Anyway, I'm not going to search for it now, but there were some people who were discussing the exact thing that I just mentioned. So it was not there in the patch. So I'm going to create a patch and fork it so that they can merge it. But the thing is, when you're working with HTech products, most of the time it is a given that oftentimes you would run into problems that solutions are not there. You have to engineer the solution at that times, especially when you're working on HTech products like blockchain or maybe some AR, VR kind of stuff, or anything that is not too available in the market. You would often run into solutions where the code is not readily available on Slack Overflow or anything like that. So you need to understand what is happening exactly internally. Here in this case scenario, you need to understand a bit about contracts, right? You need to
Yeah.
understand what the functions are, what parameters are, what it does, what does it mean by encoding call data, and then a lot of stuff you need to understand. So you need to get that out of your way, what exactly is happening on a step by step. So you need to have like concrete confidence that you're going to solve this somehow. Like when you're now that I'm explaining, I already know the solution. So it's quite
Yeah.
easy for me to explain. But when you are doing the debugging, you would not even know if what you're trying to do will actually get you to the solution, right?
Yes.
It's like you're in the vague field where you do not know all your efforts are going to be a waste, or is it going to be returning in something value. The only suggestion that I can give at this point of the time is make sure that you are logically correct, not by blind luck or anything. Just make sure
Yeah.
that you are logically correct and then go deeper and deeper. Eventually, you'll arrive at the correct solution. But if you're hoping some luck will play the field and even out the odds for you, then the most probably then you would be still be arriving at the solution, but that's a 50-50 chance.
Yeah.
So
Correct.
it's not like you're gonna arrive at the solution guaranteedly, and you would not even know if the solution is right or wrong, because essentially you do not even know what you're doing. You're just figuring
Yeah.
out things, by random trial and error means. Yeah.
Correct.
Anyway, that's what I have to offer. Any questions or doubts you guys have, shoot me. I'll try to explain.
Yeah, most of the time, like working on something which I don't know completely, like this thing, right? The pool and all. I didn't know it firstly. So what I did is I read the documentation, and some things I understood, but some things I guessed, to be
Yeah,
honest. Like that guessing thing is I'm not too confident about because I don't really know what is happening there, and if I do it, it will be correct or not. So I just experiment things, put in some values and experiment some values, and that takes a lot of time, to
Yeah,
be honest.
yeah,
And while I was debugging this execute trade, right, so I reached up until that contract thing, which I mentioned with you. But after that, I never thought of copying their code and making it edit it on my own, like you
yeah,
did, right?
mm,
So that level of thinking, I think it comes with the experience, I guess. Uh,
yeah. It's just
Maybe.
confidence, basically. You need to
Yeah,
be
yeah,
more confident. So if you do not do blind guessing at any point of the time when you're debugging, na, you would be extremely confident to modify even their source code
yeah, yeah.
because you
Correct.
understand everything. But if you do
Yes.
blind guess at some point in the middle, then you would be worried, should I copy this
Yeah,
again?
yeah.
I'm doing the wrong stuff or
So it
something like
only happens, the blind guessing, when we don't know what we are working on.
that. Yeah,
Like we don't have clear understanding.
yeah.
So that's what it gets. But I think it gets better with time.
Yeah. It's just that you can put some understanding parameters to understand when to blind guess maybe. See, in the price.tsx file, what I did is also blind guessing. I
Yeah, yeah,
myself am telling you that this is not the right solution because if the security price is lesser than 296, then you would arrive at as non-divided by or something like that. So the thing is, here it is okay because whatever problems arise, I can still, solve it over here. But here it is not okay because if you blind guess something,
yeah.
essentially this is a bigger complicated than what price.ts is.
Yes.
So it's lot of other modules inputted, so a lot of other things. So basically, if you understand what is happening from the start of this code to the end of the code, then
Yeah,
you don't even need to understand the functional files, right?
yeah,
Whatever
yeah.
is happening in the get output code, don't even need to debug there because you already understood that it's working fine. You just need to
Yes.
debug on stuff. And this is the problem. What happens is when you have not yet arrived at the solution, you often feel like doubtful whether or not the error might be in the stuff that is already working
Yes, exactly.
because you do not know where the problem is, right? So it it's just you need to feel really confident about your check that this thing is not the error is. And once you have fixed that this is not where the error is, then you should not turn back until you found a solution elsewhere. But somehow if you are failing after, I don't know, digging in a lot bit deeper, then you should start considering doubting yourself about what your initial assumptions are.
Yeah.
So if you pick a path, essentially don't cushion yourself, just go it deeper and deeper until you arrive at the solution. And just modify. Don't be afraid. I guess that is what the thing is. Even the Uniswap is not correct. Just now I told you,
Yes.
like when you're working on HTech projects, they are most likely not. Like if you're trying to go deeper and deeper into the React, then I would
Yeah,
suggest not to because there are
yeah.
already a lot of developers, doing that and fixing the stuff for us. So no need to do that level deep engineering there. But like if we are working on something related, edge tech related, like if we are building the Vercel, right? Then
Yeah.
if we are debugging into the React, then it's worthwhile because we are
Mm.
building an engineering solution on top of React. But
Yes.
we are not
Correct.
building that direction, so no need to debug in that direction. Usually, HTech is I guess you already understood it. Something that is not clearly documented or
Yeah,
not
yeah.
available, at the moment. Maybe it's in the process of innovation or something like that.
And one thing is like the time. How much time did it take for you to debug this?
The first price.tsx, it took me around 4 hours. The
And this one?
This took me again 4 hours. Same.
Yeah. So that's the problem. I have to give you like around 10 or 11. So
Yeah.
is it okay if I take the time in debugging because it does require time?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You can take it. It's don't compare yourself with me because I've done this quite a lot. Like
Yeah, yeah.
modifying Uniswap and all. I've done it with many other repositories as well. So I
true.
have modified other public repositories. So it's
No, like
anyway.
the client requires it around 10 p.m., right? So if I take my time, would that not create a problem?
Well, in our case scenario, it would create a problem. So
Yeah,
you can just tell me, and I will, arrive at a or fix
yeah,
debugging.
that's
But that is the thing, right? There is always. I'll just 1 second. I'll stop.